the night the butcher shops burned, September 7th, 1940. Stepney, East London, 6:47 p.m. Margaret Clarke stands in her kitchen staring at empty shelves where, yesterday, there had been a small joint of lamb. Her 3 children, Tommy, 8, Elizabeth, 6, little David, not yet 4, are sitting at the wooden table behind her, waiting. The question comes from Tommy, because it always does. "Mom, what's for dinner?" She doesn't answer, because 3 miles away, at the Surrey commercial docks, 350,000 tons of timber has just ignited into the largest single fire Britain has ever seen. And, mixed in with that timber, warehouses packed with frozen meat, butter stored in refrigerated vaults, eggs by the tens of thousands, sugar, flour, tea, London's food supply, going up in flames. But Margaret doesn't know that yet. Nobody does. What she knows is this: the air raid siren started wailing 47 minutes ago. The sound of aircraft engines, hundreds of them, a mechanical thunder that makes the windows rattle, has been constant overhead. And through her kitchen window, looking east toward the docks, the sky has turned the color of fresh blood. The bombers had come in waves. First at 4 p.m., 348 Heinkel, He-111 bombers escorted by 617 Messerschmitt fighters, the largest single daylight raid London had ever experienced. They targeted the docks deliberately, precisely, methodically. The Royal Docks, West India Docks, Millwall Docks, and the Surrey Commercial Docks, where timber stacked in open-air storage stretched for acres. Incendiary bombs fell first. Small things, really. Magnesium-filled cylinders that burned at temperatures hot enough to ignite wood on contact. Then came the high explosives. Not to kill, not yet, but to shatter water mains, destroy firefighting equipment, create chaos. By 6:30 p.m., telegraph poles were spontaneously bursting into flame from radiant heat alone. Half a mile of shoreline was on fire. Over 1,000 firefighting crews would fight that blaze through the night, and it wouldn't be enough. But here's what nobody would talk about for weeks. Here's what the Ministry of Information censored from the newspapers. Here's the thing that would haunt 8 million Londoners, far more than the bombs themselves. That night, London lost more than buildings. It lost approximately 70% of its refrigerated meat storage. Let me put that in perspective. Britain imported most of its food. Nearly half came from overseas, crossing the Atlantic on convoys hunted by U-boats. Of what made it to London's docks, the warehouses could store maybe 3 weeks' worth of meat for the city. Now, gone, burned, or contaminated by smoke and chemicals and God knows what else. The butter warehouses went up, the egg stores, cold storage facilities that had held beef shipped all the way from Argentina, lamb from New Zealand, pork from Canada, all of it arriving after weeks at sea, surviving submarine attacks and storms, only to burn in one night. Margaret Clarke wouldn't learn these details for days, but she'd feel them immediately, because at 8 p.m., just as she's serving her children a thin stew made from yesterday's leftover vegetables and a single sausage divided 3 ways, the bombers come back. The second wave, 247 aircraft this time, and now London is burning so bright they don't even need navigation. The fires from the first raid light up the Thames like a beacon visible for miles. German bomber crews would later report they could read maps by the glow of burning London from 10,000 feet. The bombing doesn't stop until 4:30 a.m., over 8 hours of continuous bombardment, weeks on September 8th, 430 Londoners are dead, 1,600 are injured, and Margaret Clarke, who has spent the night huddled with her children under the kitchen table because their street doesn't have a proper shelter, emerges to a changed world. She walks to the butcher shop on Commercial Road. It's still standing, barely. The windows are blown out. Inside, the owner, Mr. Feldman, is sweeping broken glass. "Any meat today?" she asks, though she already knows. He looks at her with eyes that haven't slept. "Love, the warehouses are gone. Burned. All of it. He checks behind the counter. "I've got 2 rabbits and maybe 6 pounds of mince for the whole street." This is the hidden crisis of the Blitz that nobody expected. Everyone had planned for bombs, for casualties, for destroyed homes. Nobody had planned for the systematic obliteration of London's food supply chain. Over the first week of September 1940, as the Luftwaffe continued pounding London for 57 consecutive nights, the city lost an estimated 1,400 tons of meat. Some sources claim far more. Thousands of tons of flour and grain. Sugar stores that represented weeks of supply. Dairy warehouses. Multiple cold storage facilities. Railway. Connections that brought food from the countryside. By September 14th, 1 week into the Blitz, 8 million Londoners faced a problem that would make the bombs almost secondary. How do you feed a city when the food is gone? The official ration at the time gave each person roughly 2 ounces of butter per week, 1 shilling and 10 pence worth of meat, about 2 small lamb chops, if you could find them, 1 egg per week, if available. That was before the warehouses burned. Now, the queues outside shops stretched for blocks. Women waited 4, 5, 6 hours for shops that would open with nearly empty shelves. Children who'd never known real hunger started complaining that their stomachs hurt. The elderly, already weak, began dying from malnutrition-related complications. And the government, the Ministry of Food, was facing mathematics that didn't work. They'd imported the food. It had survived the Atlantic crossing. It had made it to the docks. And then it had burned, destroyed by the very enemy they were fighting to keep out. Lord Woolton, the Minister of Food, would later write in his private diary, "We lost in one night what would have fed London for a month, and the Germans knew it." Because this wasn't accidental. German intelligence had mapped every warehouse, every cold storage facility, every food distribution center in London. Target Area A, they called the docks. Prime strategic value, destroy the docks, starve the city, break British morale. And it was working. Margaret Clarke goes home with nothing. No meat, no butter, no eggs. She has flour, maybe 3 days' worth. Some potatoes, a bit of margarine that tastes like candle wax, and 3 hungry children who don't understand why Mom can't make proper dinner anymore. That night, she lies awake, listening to the bombers return, wondering how she'll feed her family tomorrow, next week, next month. The bombs you can hear coming. You can hide from bombs. But hunger? Hunger is quiet, insidious, inevitable. Unless, what if there was another way? What if, buried in the desperation and ashes and empty pantries, British mothers were about to discover something nobody expected? What if the greatest weapon against starvation wasn't meat at all? What if it was something so ordinary, so overlooked, that even the Germans never considered it a threat? The Ministry of Food's Impossible Math, Portman Square, London, Ministry of Food Headquarters. September 12, 1940, 2:17 a.m., Frederick Marquis, Lord Woolton to everyone else, stands alone in his office staring at a chart that refuses to make sense. Outside, the air raid sirens have gone quiet. The bombers won't return for another few hours. This is his window, the only time he can think without the walls shaking. The chart shows London's remaining food stocks. The numbers, written in red ink by his chief statistician that afternoon, are catastrophic. Before the docks burned, 3 weeks of meat in cold storage. Now, 4 days, maybe 5 if they're lucky. He does the math in his head. 8 million Londoners. Each person needs roughly 2,300 calories per day to survive. Manual laborers, the ones keeping the factories running, clearing bomb damage, fighting fires, need closer to 3,500. Multiply that out. Multiply it by days, by weeks. The equation doesn't balance. It hasn't balanced since September 7th, and it's getting worse every night the bombers come back. Lord Woolton lights his third cigarette of the night and stares at the second chart. This one shows the Atlantic convoys. Of the 47 merchant ships that left Canada 3 weeks ago carrying meat, grain, and tinned goods, only 31 made it to British waters. 16 ships gone, torpedoed by U-boats, thousands of tons of food at the bottom of the Atlantic. Britain imported nearly half its food before the war. Beef from Argentina, lamb from New Zealand, butter from Denmark, eggs from Poland. Now, the Nazis controlled most of Europe. The U-boats prowled the shipping lanes, and what did make it across the ocean had to survive the Luftwaffe's bombs once it reached the docks. The Ministry of Food had been set up exactly 1 year ago, September 1939, specifically to prevent starvation if war came. They'd planned for rationing. They'd stockpiled emergency supplies. They'd built a system designed to ensure fair distribution even during shortages. But nobody had planned for this. Nobody imagined the Germans would destroy 70% of London's meat supply in a single night. Woolton picks up a ministry leaflet from his desk. The official ration amounts, freshly printed and ready for distribution to every household in Britain. Weekly ration per person as of September 1940. Butter, 4 ounces, about half a stick. Bacon and ham, 4 ounces, roughly 4 rashers. Sugar, 8 ounces. Tea, 2 ounces. Cheese, 1 ounce, a single thin slice. Meat, 1 shilling and 10 pence worth. That last one is the problem. Meat wasn't rationed by weight like everything else. It was rationed by price. The idea was that people could choose cheaper cuts and get more volume, or splurge on quality and get less. In practice, 1 shilling 10 pence bought you maybe 2 small lamb chops, or 1 tiny piece of beef for the entire week. For a family of 4, that's 1 small roast joint. Once a week, if the butcher even has meat to sell. And eggs? When available, 1 per person per week. When available. Most weeks, there were no eggs. Woolton does more math. A growing child, say, an 8-year-old boy doing manual labor in a factory because his father is fighting overseas, needs protein, lots of it, for bone growth, muscle development, and brain function. The medical advisors say a minimum 15 grams per day. The current ration provides maybe 8 on a good week. This isn't sustainable. Kids will start showing signs of malnutrition within 6 weeks. Rickets, stunted growth, weakened immune systems, and then they'll start dying from diseases that protein deficiency makes lethal. But here's the thing Woolton knows that the public doesn't. It's going to get worse before it gets better. The ministry's projections, locked in his desk drawer, show that by January 1941, the meat supply will drop another 30%. The U-boats are winning the Atlantic. Every week, more ships go down, less food arrives, which brings Woolton to the innovation he's been working on in secret for 3 months, the points system. Starting in January 1941, certain foods, tinned goods, rice, dried fruit, biscuits, cereals, would be rationed not by fixed amounts, but by a flexible points allowance. Every person would get 16 points per month to spend however they wanted. A tin of salmon might cost 4 points, a box of cornflakes, 2 points, a tin of sardines, 1 point. The brilliance of the system? It gave people choice, a sense of control in a world spiraling out of control. You could save your points for a special occasion, Christmas dinner maybe, or spend them immediately on what you needed most. But the system also hid something crucial. The government could adjust the points value of foods based on availability without changing the allowance. When tins of meat became scarce, their points cost would skyrocket. When tinned vegetables were plentiful, the cost dropped. It was rationing disguised as freedom, and the public would never realize they were being manipulated. What wasn't rationed? That's the interesting part. Bread, potatoes, fresh vegetables. Why? Because Britain could grow those domestically. The Dig for Victory campaign was already converting parks, lawns, and bomb craters into vegetable gardens. If people had unlimited access to bread, potatoes, and homegrown vegetables, they could theoretically survive even without meat. Theoretically. There was also another market operating in the shadows, one Woolton couldn't control and didn't like to acknowledge: the black market. A pound of butter that officially cost 1 shilling 3 pence could fetch 5 shillings from the right buyer. A whole chicken, impossible to find in legal shops, sold for 25 shillings in the back rooms of pubs in Whitechapel. Eggs? 2 shillings each, if you knew who to ask. Butchers were taking bribes. Warehouse workers were losing inventory. Farmers were selling directly to wealthy Londoners at triple the controlled prices. The penalties, 2 years in prison, £500 fine, didn't deter people desperate for profit or food. And Woolton knew that if he cracked down too hard, the system would collapse entirely. Better to let some corruption slide than lose the cooperation of the shopkeepers, keeping Britain fed. But none of this, the rations, the point system, the black market, solved the fundamental crisis staring him in the face. Where would the protein come from? His chief scientific advisor, a biochemist named Jack Drummond, had been running experiments in the basement laboratories, trying to find alternatives, substitutes, anything that could deliver the essential amino acids children needed without requiring meat. They'd tested whale meat shipped from Antarctic whaling stations. It arrived purple, reeking of fish oil, tough as boot. Leather. Test subjects gagged trying to chew it. They'd tried snook, a South African fish packed in tins, oily, fishy. Most people refused to eat it more than once. Dried egg powder from America worked surprisingly well. Mix it with water, scramble it. It tasted rubbery, but edible. The ministry ordered 50,000 tons. And then there was Woolton's pet project, the thing his staff mockingly called Woolton Pie. The recipe was simple: diced vegetables, potatoes, swedes, turnips, carrots, whatever was available, stewed together, thickened with oatmeal, topped with pastry crust or mashed potato, served with thin gravy. No meat, no eggs, no cheese, just vegetables. The Savoy Hotel chef had created it at Woolton's request to prove that meatless meals could be respectable, elegant even. The press had eaten it up, literally and figuratively. They'd published the recipe. Radio presenters on the Kitchen Front program had demonstrated it live on air. The public's response? Mixed. Some families embraced it. Others called it an insult. Pie without the filling, they said. War food. But here's what Woolton scientists had discovered. If you combined vegetables correctly, root vegetables for carbohydrates, peas or beans for protein, oatmeal for fiber, you could approximate nutritional completeness. Not perfect, not ideal, but enough to keep a population alive. The problem was convincing mothers it was enough, convincing them that their children could thrive without roast beef and bacon. Woolton closes the folder and walks to his window. Dawn is breaking over London. He can see smoke still rising from the East End, fires that have burned for 5 days straight. Somewhere out there, in the wreckage of bombed-out Stepney, in the cramped kitchens of Whitechapel, in the shelters of Bethnal Green, mothers are waking up to face the same impossible question he's been wrestling with all night. How do you feed your family when the food has run out? But here's what Woolton doesn't know yet, what nobody in the Ministry of Food has realized. Those mothers, the ones with empty pantries and hungry children and nothing but potatoes and dried peas and half a tin of condensed milk, those mothers are already figuring it out themselves. They're inventing recipes the ministry hasn't dreamed of. They're discovering food combinations that work. They're creating a cuisine of scarcity that will not only keep London alive, but will, decades later, prove to be healthier than anything people ate before the war. The answer isn't in Lord Woolton's charts or scientific experiments or government-issued recipe cards. It's in the kitchens of the East End, where desperation is breeding innovation faster than any ministry laboratory ever could. The whale meat experiment and other desperate measures. July 1941. A fishmonger's shop in Bethnal Green, East London. The queue stretches down the street. 40 women, maybe 50, waiting since dawn. When the shutters finally roll up at 8 a.m., there's a collective gasp. Displayed on the counter, massive purple slabs of meat, each one roughly 2 feet long, glistening with moisture, smelling faintly of the ocean. Not beef, not pork, nothing anyone recognizes. The fishmonger's assistant, a young woman named Alice, pins up a handwritten sign. Mrs. Edith Thompson, age 34, mother of 3, is first in line. She's been calculating in her head all morning. Unrationed means no coupons required. And at 1 shilling, 6p per pound, it's cheaper than the meat ration when you can even find meat. "I'll take 2 pounds, she says. Alice wraps the purple flesh in brown paper. Mrs. Thompson carries it home like it's treasure. Because in July 1941, in London, it might as well be. That evening, she follows the Ministry of Food recipe card to the letter. Soak the whale meat overnight in vinegar water to remove the fishy taste. The next morning, she drains it, pats it dry, cuts it into chunks, boils it for an hour, then another hour. The kitchen fills with a smell that makes her children gag. She serves it for dinner with mashed turnips and a thin gravy. Her 8-year-old son, Tommy, takes 1 bite and spits it into his napkin. "Mum, it tastes like bad fish and bad meat at the same time." Mrs. Thompson tries a piece herself. He's right. The texture is dense, chewy, almost rubbery. The flavor, even after hours of boiling and the overnight vinegar soak, tastes like the Thames at low tide. Fishy oil coats her tongue. She makes her children eat it anyway, because it's protein, because the ration gives them 1 egg per week and maybe 2 lamb chops if they're lucky, because desperation has made her willing to feed her family well. But here's what the Ministry of Food leaflets don't mention. Most British housewives can't stomach it. The whale meat experiment was supposed to provide millions of pounds of unrationed protein. The government imported it from Antarctic whaling stations, massive carcasses processed on factory ships, frozen, shipped to Britain. By 1950, 4,000 tons of whale meat would sit unsold on Tyneside docks. Nobody wanted it, no matter how the ministry tried to sell it, no matter how many recipe cards they distributed showing whale meat curry or whale meat pie. British housewives collectively said no. But whale meat wasn't the only strange food desperate times demanded. In December 1941, tins of snook arrived from South Africa. Snook, a barracuda-like fish, oily, pungent, packed in rectangular tins that weighed 2 pounds each. The Ministry of Food promoted it heavily, posters everywhere. Snook picante. Snook fish cakes. Snook makes tasty meals. The reality? Women opened the tins and recoiled from the smell. The fish was dark, greasy, swimming in its own oil. Some housewives tried mixing it with mashed potato to dilute the flavor. Others attempted to disguise it in pies. One woman, recorded in the Mass Observation Archive, wrote, "Opened a tin of snook today. The cat refused to eat it. That tells you everything you need to know." Snook became the punchline of wartime jokes. A standing gag was that unsold tins of snook were being melted down and turned into munitions. Nobody believed it, but the joke persisted because it felt true. But not every strange food failed. Dried egg powder, shipped from America in rectangular tins, actually worked. Each tin contained the equivalent of 12 eggs. You mixed the yellow powder with water, whisked it until smooth, and scrambled it in a pan. The result? Rubbery, slightly sulfurous. Not quite right, but edible, and more importantly, versatile. Mrs. Barbara Donaldson, age 13 in 1940, would remember decades later. The dried egg was quite tasty and had a great deal of uses. We made scrambled eggs, omelets, even cakes with it. After the war, I always refused to buy powdered eggs again because they reminded me of those years. But during the war, they saved us. The ministry pushed other creative solutions. Carrot fudge. Yes, really. Mix grated carrots with dried milk powder, sugar when available, and a touch of vanilla flavoring. The result looked like fudge, had the texture of fudge, even tasted vaguely sweet. It wasn't chocolate, but for children who hadn't tasted real sweets in months, it was close enough. And then there were the mock foods, the recipes that tried to recreate unavailable luxuries using whatever was on hand. Mock goose, a mixture of potatoes and apples baked with sage, served with onion gravy. No goose involved, just the idea of goose. Mock crab, scrambled dried egg mixed with vinegar and salad cream, served on toast. It tasted nothing like crab, but the name made it feel special. Mock cream, beat margarine with sugar and milk until fluffy. Use it to fill cakes. Ignore the fact that real cream exists somewhere in the world, just not here. The most famous wartime recipe, Lord Woolton Pie. named after the Minister of Food himself, created by the Savoy Hotel chef in 1941 as propaganda. The message: even fancy hotels are eating vegetables now. You should too. The recipe was simple. Dice whatever vegetables you have: potatoes, turnips, parsnips, carrots, cauliflower. Stew them together with a bit of oatmeal to thicken the liquid. Top with pastry crust or mashed potato. Serve with thin vegetable gravy. No meat, no eggs, no cheese, just vegetables pretending to be a pie. The public's response was mixed. Some families embraced it. It was filling, cheap, and you could make it with literally whatever was growing in your garden. Others called it an insult. Pie without the filling, they complained. The Ministry of Food propaganda machine worked overtime. Cartoon characters appeared everywhere. Potato Pete, a cheerful anthropomorphic potato encouraging people to eat more potatoes instead of bread. Dr. Carrot, a carrot in a top hat and monocle, claiming carrots helped you see in the dark. A lie designed to hide the existence of radar, but it worked. Actual wartime cookbooks became collections of wild substitutions. Can't get eggs? Use dried egg powder or vinegar plus baking soda. No butter? Mix margarine with grated carrot for color. No sugar? Use carrots again, or dried fruit for sweetness. No meat stock? Boil vegetable peelings for hours. But underneath all the recipes and propaganda, nutritionists at the Ministry of Food were wrestling with a fundamental problem. How do you keep a population healthy when you can't give them meat? The science of nutrition was still new. Vitamins had only been discovered in the 1910s and 1920s. Protein requirements were understood, but the concept of complete proteins, foods containing all essential amino acids, wasn't common knowledge yet. Ministry scientists working with biochemists discovered something crucial. You could get complete protein by combining specific plant foods. Beans plus grains equals complete protein. Peas plus wheat equals complete protein. Lentils plus rice equals complete protein. It was chemistry, amino acids pairing up to create what the body needed, and it meant you could theoretically survive without meat. Theoretically. The challenge was convincing mothers. From the Mass Observation Archive, a diary entry from a housewife in Stepney, October 1941. Tuesday, breakfast, porridge with dried milk. Dinner, vegetable stew, turnips, carrots, 1 potato each, no meat. Tea, bread and margarine. Supper, bread and dripping. I look at my children and wonder if they're getting enough. Tommy is thin, his ribs show. Elizabeth's hair doesn't shine like it used to. Are they starving slowly while I feed them vegetables and dried eggs and promise it's enough? The ministry says it's nutritious. The posters say we're healthier than ever. But I remember roast beef on Sundays. I remember butter. I remember when food wasn't mathematics. That entry captures the psychological toll nobody talks about. The mental exhaustion of constant meal planning with almost nothing. The anxiety of wondering if vegetables are really enough. The monotony of eating the same 5 foods in different combinations week after week after week. Children who grew up during the Blitz would remember this forever. The taste of dried eggs, the texture of whale meat, that one horrible time their mother made them try it. The Sunday when there was no roast, again. Some would remember it as character building. Others would spend the rest of their lives refusing to eat turnips. But here's what none of them knew at the time. There was one place in London where mothers found genuine help, where the Food was hot, cheap, and nutritious, where you could feed your children a proper meal for 9 pence, where the government accidentally created something that would save thousands of lives, not through propaganda or recipe cards, but through actually feeding people. The British Restaurant Revolution. In November 1941, a former church hall in Stepney, East London, 11:47 a.m. The queue snakes around the block, dock workers still dusted with soot from the night's fires, mothers with children clutching their hands, elderly men leaning on walking sticks. They're all waiting for the same thing, a hot meal for 9 pence. Inside, what used to be a Sunday school classroom has been transformed. Long wooden tables arranged in rows, bright-colored chairs, red, blue, yellow, deliberately cheerful against the gray reality outside, fresh flowers in jam jars on every table, and most importantly, the smell of food actually cooking. Mrs. Alice Brennan, 42, bombed out of her home 3 weeks ago, reaches the front of the queue. A woman in a WVS uniform hands her 3 colored tokens in exchange for her coins. Brown for the main course, green for pudding, yellow for tea. She sits at a communal table next to a businessman in a suit and a factory worker in overalls. 6 months ago, they wouldn't have shared a table. Class boundaries kept them separate. But now they're all just hungry. The meal arrives. Beef stew with carrots and potatoes, bread and margarine, rice pudding with a tiny spoonful of jam, cup of tea. Mrs. Brennan picks up her fork and realizes she's about to cry. It's the first hot meal she's had in 3 weeks that she didn't have to cook herself with almost nothing. The first time since the bombing that food has just appeared. Ready, hot, real. This was Churchill's revolution, though he'd hate that word. When the bombing started in September 1940, the government faced an immediate crisis. Thousands of people bombed out of their homes had no kitchens, no way to cook. The London County Council scrambled to open emergency feeding stations. They called them communal feeding centers. Churchill hated the name, thought it sounded like Soviet Russia, like the workhouse. An odious expression, he called it in March 1941. I suggest you call them British restaurants. Everybody associates the word restaurant with a good meal. So British restaurants they became. The Ministry of Food, under Lord Woolton, allocated over £4 million to establish them nationwide. Manchester and Birmingham went first in November 1940. London followed. By 1943, there were 2,160 British restaurants across Britain, serving 600,000 meals every single day. The genius of the system? Industrial-scale cooking. When you're cooking for 300 people instead of 3, the math changes. You can afford a nutritionist to plan balanced meals. You can buy ingredients in bulk at controlled prices. You can hire professional cooks who know how to stretch rations into actual food. The reality? The food was often grim. A mass observation diarist, December 1941. Not so bad. Generous helpings of soup, meat, vegetables, and a sweet for just 9 pence. The same woman, March 1942. Lunch of beef, potatoes, bread pudding, custard, and coffee. Quite satisfying. April 1942. Dreadful. The liberal use of sage and onion in the mock goose caused me hours of pain and discomfort. But here's what mattered. It was there. Hot. Affordable. When your home was rubble and your ration coupons were running low, A British restaurant meant you wouldn't starve. And something else was happening, something nobody expected. Class barriers were disintegrating. Before the war, a businessman didn't eat next to a factory worker. A lady in a fur coat didn't share a table with a charwoman. But in British restaurants, everyone queued together. Everyone paid the same 9 pence. Everyone got the same meal. The rules enforced it. You could have only 1 serving of protein, meat, fish, eggs, or cheese, not 2. 1. The Duke and the Dustman got identical portions. Women who'd spent their entire lives eating at home discovered communal dining. Working women who couldn't go home for lunch found affordable hot meals near their factories. The psychological impact of eating together, suffering together, surviving together, it changed British society in ways that would last decades. But the most extraordinary meals weren't served in church halls. They were served 100 feet underground. During the Blitz, thousands of Londoners sheltered in tube stations every night. Families would arrive before dark, stake out their spot on the platform, and settle in for 12 hours of air raids. And they needed to eat. The Women's Voluntary Service set up improvised kitchens in the tube stations, boiling water for tea on portable stoves, making sandwiches with whatever bread and margarine they could scrounge, sometimes cooking simple soups or stews in giant pots. One WVS volunteer, recorded in wartime records, described cooking for 300 people on the platform of Bethnal Green Station. We had 2 camping stoves, a box of tea, some tinned milk, and about 50 loaves of bread. That was it. But we made it work. Because what else were we going to do? Let them go hungry? The community that formed underground was unlike anything Britain had seen. Strangers sharing food, families passing around their last biscuits, children being fed by neighbors when their own parents had nothing left. An 8-year-old girl, interviewed decades later, remembered, "There was a lady who always had extra sandwiches, never knew her name. But every night during the raids, she'd walk down the platform giving sandwiches to children whose parents looked worried." Years later, I realized she was probably going without dinner herself to make those sandwiches. Meanwhile, nutritionists at the Ministry of Food were tracking something remarkable. Despite the rationing, despite the bombing, despite the shortages, children's health was improving. Infant mortality, which had been rising during World War I, hit the lowest levels ever recorded in British history. In 1945, Sir Wilson Jameson, Chief Medical Officer, reported the death rates for children up to 10 years of age were last year the lowest on record, as was the proportion of mothers dying as a result of their confinements. The statistics seemed impossible. Children were taller, heavier, fewer cases of rickets, less anemia, better dental health. What was happening? The rich were eating less. For the first time in British history, wealthy families couldn't buy their way out of scarcity. They got the same rations as everyone else. Their children ate less sugar, less fatty meat, fewer refined foods. The poor were eating more, and more consistently. Before the war, poverty meant malnutrition. During the war, rationing meant everyone got enough. The guaranteed ration, supplemented by British restaurants, school meals, and welfare provisions, ensured baseline nutrition for children who'd been starving before. Diet-related diseases declined across the board. The forced reduction in sugar consumption meant fewer cases of diabetes and tooth decay. The emphasis on vegetables, driven by dig for victory meant more vitamins. The rationed meat meant less saturated fat. Britain had accidentally stumbled into one of the healthiest diets in its history. But the real genius wasn't in government programs or industrial kitchens or scientific meal planning. It was what happened when mothers went home. When they looked at their empty cupboards, one egg, half a tin of condensed milk, some potatoes, dried peas, and decided their children would eat tonight. Somehow, when they opened their mother's old cookbook and started crossing out ingredients that didn't exist anymore, writing substitutions in the margins, inventing recipes from nothing, when they turned scarcity into art. That's where the real story begins. The Recipe Cards That Saved Lives, Imperial War Museum, London. Present day, preserved behind glass. A small notebook, brown leather cover worn at the edges. Inside, pages yellowed with age, covered in neat handwriting. A woman's recipe collection from 1941 to 1945. But look closer. The margins tell a different story. Next to Victoria sponge cake, original recipe crossed out. Use dried egg, written above it. Below, this works without eggs, tried November 14th, 41, children ate it. Under beef stew, the word beef has a line through it, replaced with vegetables plus oatmeal. A note, tastes nothing like beef, but fills them up. On bread pudding, no sugar, used carrot plus tiny bit syrup. Michael said it was sweet enough. Every recipe altered, every ingredient substituted, every meal a small act of defiance against starvation. This notebook belonged to Mrs. Dorothy Williams of Clapham, mother of 3. She kept this record through the entire war, documenting not just what she cooked, but how she adapted, improvised, and survived. And she wasn't alone. Across Britain, millions of women were rewriting centuries of British cooking in real time. Meat pies without meat, cakes without eggs, Sunday roasts that contained no roast at all. The chemistry of desperation turned out to be surprisingly effective. Take eggless cakes. Eggs provide structure, moisture, and leavening. How do you bake without them? Wartime cooks discovered vinegar plus baking soda creates a chemical reaction that mimics eggs. Add it to a basic flour and margarine batter, and you get a rise. Not perfect, not the same, but close enough that children ate it and called it cake. Meat pies without meat. Fill the pastry with vegetables, potatoes, carrots, turnips, thickened with oatmeal and a bit of vegetable stock. Season heavily with sage, onion, whatever herbs grew in the garden. The texture fooled nobody, but it filled my stomachs. The shocking thing, many of these substitutions worked, but women didn't figure this out alone. They had help from an unlikely celebrity. Every morning at 8:15 a.m., millions of British housewives turned on their wireless sets and listened to a 5-minute program called The Kitchen Front. The voice they heard belonged to Margaret Patton. 27 years old when the war started, Patton worked for the Ministry of Food, traveling to factories, markets, bomb shelters, anywhere women gathered, demonstrating recipes that used rationed ingredients. Her philosophy was simple. Don't tell them what they can't have. Show them what they can make with what they've got. She stood in market squares with portable cooking equipment, her voice carrying over crowds of 250 people. We didn't wait for people to come to us, she'd later recall. We went wherever people were. Her recipes became gospel. Oatmeal sausages, potato pastry, carrot marmalade, when citrus fruit vanished. mock cream made from margarine, cornstarch, and sheer optimism. It was jolly good, Patton would insist decades later, without a trace of irony. The Ministry of Food backed her up with leaflets dropped through letterboxes in bombed neighborhoods, bright-colored pamphlets with titles like Food Facts for the Kitchen Front. Each one contained recipes, yes, but also propaganda disguised as nutritional advice. Carrots help you see in the dark, a lie to hide radar technology, but it got children to eat vegetables. Potatoes give you energy. True, and potatoes were unrationed. The message underneath it all: keep cooking, keep feeding your family, carry on. And here's the astonishing part: it worked. Not just psychologically, physically. Infant mortality during World War II decreased, hit the lowest levels in British history. Children grew taller, heavier, healthier. Rickets, a disease of vitamin D deficiency, declined dramatically. Anemia rates dropped. Dental health improved. In 2015, scientists analyzed the wartime diet using modern nutritional data. Their conclusion shocked them. The wartime diet was healthier than what British people ate before the war. Lower sugar consumption, more vegetables, better distribution of nutrients. The rich couldn't buy their way to excess. The poor got guaranteed baseline nutrition. Forced equality created better health outcomes for everyone. The irony is almost painful. Austerity saved lives. But don't mistake this for a happy story. The psychological toll was brutal. From Mass Observation Diaries, November 1943. Made the same turnip stew 3 nights this week. The children are sick of it. I'm sick of it. But there's nothing else. I dream about roast chicken. Wake up disappointed it wasn't real. This is what the war has done to me. I dream about food. Another woman, April 1944. I'm so tired. Tired of queuing. Tired of improvising. Tired of pretending carrot fudge is a treat. I fed my children mock goose tonight and wanted to cry because I remember what real goose tasted like, and they never will. The constant improvisation, the daily anxiety of, will I have enough? The monotony of eating the same 7 ingredients in different combinations. It wore women down in ways bombs never could. And there were casualties, small but real. Malnutrition deaths happened, mostly among the elderly who gave up their rations for grandchildren. Mostly unreported, mostly forgotten. Mrs. Dorothy Williams, the woman whose recipe book sits in the museum, lost her mother in 1943. The death certificate said heart failure. The unspoken truth, she'd been giving half her food to her daughter's children for 2 years. But most survived, and their children, the ones born during the war, fed on dried eggs and vegetable stew and sheer maternal willpower, grew up strong. There's a man named Peter Thompson, born in Stepney in 1942. He's 78 now. When interviewed about his childhood, he said, I didn't taste an orange until 1946. I was 4 years old. My mom cried and she gave it to me. I didn't understand why. I do now. A generation raised on scarcity, shaped by mothers who turned nothing into something night after night for years. And then, finally, it ended. July 4th, 1954. 14 years after rationing began. At midnight on July 3rd, meat rations officially ended. The last food restriction was lifted. Members of the London Housewives Association held a ceremony in Trafalgar Square. The Minister of Food, Geoffrey Lloyd, burned his ration book. That Sunday, July 4th, 1954, British families sat down to their first peacetime roast in 14 years. Imagine it, a real joint of beef, roasted potatoes in actual fat, Yorkshire pudding made with real eggs, gravy that didn't come from vegetable water, and OXO cubes. Some families cried, some ate in silence, some couldn't quite believe it was real. Dorothy Williams's daughter, interviewed in 1985, remembered that meal. Mum made a roast with all the trimmings. We ate until we felt sick, and then she sat at the table with her hands over her face and sobbed. We asked if she was okay. She said, "I'm just so relieved I never have to be clever with vegetables again." What was lost? The easy assumption that food would always be available. The innocence of not having to think about where meals came from. What was gained? A generation that knew how to survive, that valued food, that didn't waste, that understood viscerally what it meant to have enough. Next time you open your refrigerator and see shelves full of choices, meat, dairy, vegetables, fruits from 6 different countries, remember this: 70 years ago, British mothers fed their families on 1 egg per week and sheer determination. They rewrote recipes on the fly. They made cakes without eggs and pies without meat, and told their children it was enough. And it was, not because the food was good, not because the situation was bearable, but because London mothers fought a different kind of war. With recipe cards instead of rifles, with substitutions instead of strategies, with love disguised as carrot fudge, they won. What's the most creative meal you've ever made with limited ingredients? Drop a comment. I genuinely want to know. And if you found this story valuable, you'll want to hear about the Nazi food weapon that backfired so catastrophically it changed the course of the entire war. Next time, subscribe so you don't miss it. Thanks for watching. And the next time you cook dinner, whatever you're making, remember the women who made miracles from nothing.